My name is Joanne Foster, and I'm a member of the Social Justice Associates at South Church in Portsmouth, and I want to welcome all of you tonight. I'm thrilled that so many of you have registered to attend, this very important and timely discussion. And I want to thank the panelists, the individuals and the organizations that they represent for taking time to share their expertise and their stories with us at great time and risk and emotion. And so I'm just so grateful for all of them for taking the time. The Social Justice Associates has been working on immigration justice for the past 2 years and really trying to raise up this issue in the broader community so that we can push forward a just and humane immigration system. And sometimes we forget, as we do with so many justice issues, how close to home this issue really is. And we're going to hear some powerful stories tonight. And so, again, I'm grateful. And I want to introduce Jim Verschueren, who is going to moderate tonight's discussion. Jim is a longtime South Church not social justice associate, but member.
Yeah.
And he is the coordinator, the volunteer from South Church for the Seacoast Interfaith Sanctuary Coalition. And he's been involved in these issues for a long time and sort of kicked off his passion as a Peace Corps member many years ago. So Jim, I want to thank you for doing this and thank all of you. And I will bump off and let me know in the chat if you have any questions or need me.
Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm really happy to be able to do this and just thrilled with the number of people who have joined us. So thank you for being with us tonight. It is going to be a great program. The ground rules are pretty simple. You've already found out that you will not be seen or heard in this webinar format. We're not the usual kind of Zoom thing, but there will be ample time left for questions. And if you put your questions in the chat, we have two people, Janet and Robin, who are working on making sure we're ready to answer your questions when the time comes. One caution that people reminded me of this before the meeting started was that everything you put in the chat will be saved. So you may not want to have too personal conversations. If you see people in the chat and you want to have greetings back and forth, that's fine. Just remember, whatever you say, we will all see and will be there permanently forever and ever and ever. Let's see if there's anything else we can do. I just want to say a word about the Seacoast Interfaith Sanctuary Coalition. It's how I got involved. We are, I think, 8 faith communities that have joined together, first to offer sanctuary and now to work on the immigrant justice, particularly relative to detainees. So South Church has hosted in our sanctuary, in our building, a quarantined individual, and other churches in the group are doing the same thing. And I know Maggie Fogarty will be speaking more about that as we proceed. So I think that is all we need to know about ground rules. Let me introduce the 4 speakers we have, and then we'll turn it over to our first speaker. So our first speaker is going to be Raquiba Huq. She's the supervising attorney of the Immigration Representation Project, IRP, at Legal Services of New Jersey. She's also a part-time lecturer in immigration law at Rutgers Law School, but tonight she's speaking from a personal point of view. Maggie Fogarty is the co-director of the New Hampshire program for the American Friends Service Committee. She's the convener of the New Hampshire Immigrant Rights Network, co-founder of the New Hampshire Immigrant Visitation Program, and a member of the Dover Friends meeting in Dover, New Hampshire, where she lives. Bienfait came to the US last year from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's seeking asylum. Bienfait is married and has 8 children. Prior to coming to the US, he was a banker in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Bienfait currently works at Crotched Mountain as a resident counselor and is working on his English. We've already heard it's very good, and studying accounting and finance. And finally, KJ is from Uganda, and he is seeking asylum. He was detained for approximately 6 weeks at Suffolk County Jail in Massachusetts in 2018, and now he is active with BJAN. BJAN stands for Boston Immigration Justice Accompaniment Network, BIJAN. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Raquiba, and you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for letting me join all the way here from New Jersey. What I'd like to do with my time is provide kind of a structural or a systematic overview of detention and deportation as it exists today, kind of where we came from and where we are now, because I think the more important and more powerful voices which you will hear are from those who are my fellow panelists who've actually been through this system themselves. So I'll just try to keep it brief and a little bit just to give us some context to our upcoming conversation. So just, going back a little bit, I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic, but I think it's important to know how we got to where we are and potentially why we got to where we are in terms of our detention policies and deportation policies. Since the birth of America, there's been an inherent understanding of what it means to be a sovereign nation, to be able to either try to kick people out or to keep people out. This is not an enumerated power anywhere, but this has just been an implicit power that our nation has exercised in different ways throughout history. So we've seen this in the form of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. We've seen it as recently as 1965, which is not that long ago, in the fact that we had quotas for different regions of the world for who we would let in based on favorable versus unfavorable populations or immigrants. We see it even today in perhaps more covert ways. Even if we don't have an outright quota system, they still sneak in because the employment-based and family-based processes, which have issues that we won't even mention here, also have these built-in delays for certain countries. For Mexico, India, the Philippines, you might have a 10-year additional waiting period if you're from one of those countries than for others. So the quota system still exists in that sense. And this is what I guess what I'd like to put into context is that what we have faced under this administration and what we're continuing to face today as immigration advocates and advocates for our immigrant communities is that trying to deport people, trying to restrict who comes in based on policies or problematic norms or ideals that hopefully will just be dust in history in time is nothing new. So that leads us to where we are now with, I'm sure you all know about the Muslim ban and the asylum restrictions to restrict people to seek asylum at our borders, like the very principles of international human rights. We're turning people away now to say that you have to try to first apply in another country, or you have to wait in Mexico for months and hope that you get notice and are able to come back for your fear interviews and for your asylum hearings. So it's still happening. And then there are sort of more subtle, pernicious ways that people are being dissuaded from coming as well, if not an outright ban. There's also just the practice of separating families and detaining families, removing children from their guardians or their parents. And that in effect, even if it's not an outright ban, is certainly serving to give a big red flag to people. Hey, this is not a country that wants to welcome you to apply for asylum, to seek protection here, or to seek a better life here. So it's in one sense, it's nothing new, but in another sense, it's developed into certainly something more malicious and maybe with a lot more underlying bias and discriminatory tones, although that existed before. So what does that mean in terms of detention? Well, let's trace it back a little bit. So we've talked about just overall, the fact that we have tried to keep people out and kick people out. But when did we start trying to detain people as well? So we actually can look back at a time in quite a different administration from now, into the Clinton administration in 1996, where even under Democratic administration, there were 2 or 3 seminal laws that changed, or laws that came into effect that made our immigration laws much harsher. In terms of who can be detained, who can be mandatorily detained without bond, and more on that later, who can be subject to criminal grounds of deportability. So that's where this shift, I believe, started. And then you fast forward a few years to 2001, after September 11th, when then there was certainly a targeted campaign towards particularly men of Middle Eastern, Arab, and Muslim descent, where through these interrogation programs, slowly people started to get picked up, detained in either ICE detention centers or secret prisons. And then that just essentially increased year by year even under the Obama administration, the numbers were going up every year. And now we're at a level where there are, on any given day, at least prior to the pandemic, about 40,000 people detained on any one day in this country under ICE custody. So essentially, it's, even though it's ICE or civil in nature, it's still custody. So we have 40,000 people detained. The most recent numbers for fiscal year 2019 that ICE puts out on their website is that they made 143,000 arrests and deported 267,000 people. So that was an increase from the year before, and it just keeps going up. So why detention? I mean, part of it is certainly policy and politics, but also I think it's important today to point out how much money is involved in prisons, in the for-profit prison industry, in incarcerating people. And it's something that we can't not mention, especially with what's going on after George Floyd's murder, just seeing how we have this industry that profits off of detaining Black and brown bodies, keeping them detained, not looking at what's best for the community, what's best for those individuals, what's best for either rehabilitation or reintegration. And that has its tentacles in the ICE detention system as well. And that's why we have all of these people detained, all of these for-profit prison companies like Geo Group and Core Civic, as well as counties and local jurisdictions who get a lot of money from ICE for having beds, who are so heavily invested in keeping these contracts and this detention system going and growing. So who is getting detained? Who are filling all these beds? Before the Trump administration, the one thing I will say is that under the Obama administration, there was at least a stated network or a system of priorities. So it wasn't a free-for-all. There were certain categories of people that ICE would go after in their operations or focus on in their operations. And pretty much if you didn't fall inside one of those groups, not necessarily that you were safe, but relatively you could expect some level of discretion or avoiding the net that was being cast by ICE when they're out on their operations. Now the priority system is thrown out the window immediately after the new administration started. So we have various groups of people who are seeing in different degrees and different numbers in at least our detention centers in New Jersey. So we have people who are encountered by ICE at the border, and this could be people who are presenting themselves at a port of entry at the border to say, hey, I'm here and I'm fleeing harm or persecution or violence, or people who are attempting to come through another part of the border as well. And the ports of entry don't exist just at the border, right? So there's also ports of entry in our airports. So we have people who come in through an airport and seek asylum after getting interviewed by Customs and Border Protection after landing in JFK or Newark International. And those individuals can and are immediately detained. I don't think a lot of people know this, but if you come, let's say with a tourist visa from your home country, you're able to escape, you get here, you tell an official that, hey, I can't go back, I'm actually here to seek asylum. Your visa is automatically invalidated because you're not technically a tourist since you don't intend to go back. And now you can seek asylum, but you're gonna be detained. So that's one group of individuals, people who are coming in or seeking to come in. Then we have what ICE refers to as internal apprehensions. And this includes people in our communities who are being picked up in a variety of different ways, either at home, at work, on the street, through raids. These are individuals who could have lived in our communities for years, paying taxes. That's one big myth. You could be undocumented and pay taxes, and our undocumented community does pay a lot of taxes. So, paying taxes, having US citizen children, working, and US citizen children too, that's another myth. You hear anchor babies a lot. Having US citizen children isn't an automatic protection against deportation. Countless stories of people being separated from their children that way. That's another angle to the family separation piece of our immigration policy. So that's just another misconception that just having a US citizen baby can somehow save you or protect you. And in fact, babies can't apply for their parents. The babies aren't filling out relative petition forms. At best, you have to wait until that child is 21, and even then there might be obstacles. So in any case, finally, we see people who are in immigration detention through the criminal justice system or from criminal custody. And ICE really likes to make a big deal of how, I think they said 86% of the people we deported last year were criminals. We apprehended people with pending and final charges. So here, this is a topic, sort of an issue near and dear to my heart, because Again, I think criminal is a broad brush term. It paints groups of people as a monolith, and it's very problematic. It's used as a political tool. So what does ICE mean when they say they detain and deport criminal people? Well, first of all, some of these criminal convictions could simply be federal misdemeanors for unlawful entry or reentry. And that's all, so nothing in addition to the act of trying to come in. Then there are people who have pending charges, and we see this a lot in New Jersey after our bail reform, where people are, because of bail reform, people are essentially transferred immediately into ICE custody after being arrested on a charge within a few days. So their criminal cases are far from over. But you're innocent until proven guilty, but you can't really prove that if you're in ICE detention, and there's no obligation of ICE or the immigration judge to allow you to go out and finish fighting your criminal charges. So it's a catch-22, and oftentimes people are innocent, or people are forced to take pleas because they want to get their cases resolved while they're in ICE detention so they can move on with their immigration case. And I'm not even going to talk about here how we have plea mills in our criminal courts, and how people are essentially forced to take pleas when they could win at trial for either procedural issues or innocence issue, just being innocent. So we have those individuals as well that ICE likes to categorized as criminals. And then finally, some people do have convictions. Are they all rapists and murderers? No. People have convictions as minor, as disorderly conduct, petty offenses, petty theft, minor marijuana offenses, things like that. And it ranges from there, but I think it's, again, using this term as a sort of broad brush monolithic term is extremely problematic. And even for the more serious offenses, these individuals have served their time already. So they've, whatever sentence they needed to serve and were given by the criminal system, they've done. And now we're facing essentially a double or additional penalty on top of that. Some of these individuals are longtime legal permanent residents, green card holders, who have, again, lived here for years. And we've had clients who are green card holders and might have 2 minor marijuana convictions, which make them deportable. Or maybe 2 minor shoplifting convictions, which make them deportable. And again, I don't think a lot of people know these stories, because what certain parts of the government and the media want you to think is that ICE is, when they say 86% of the people we deported are criminals, it's all rapists and murderers and child molesters, and that's just not true. So again, just mindful of what people are hopefully becoming more aware of if they weren't already aware of today. You also have to put this in context of how people and communities are policed, right? Because who are the police arresting more disproportionately, right? Black community members, other people of color, Indigenous community members. And so if you factor that in, you're seeing the disproportionate amount of policing and arrests leading to people getting into ICE detention. Just to be very blunt, you're not going to see a lot of blonde-haired, blue-eyed teenage boys getting picked up for marijuana. Most places it's either being legalized or going to be legal. Commercial marijuana is legalized, but a lot of my clients, who aren't white, are in there for minor marijuana charges. That's just an example. In any case, that's something we can explore more in the Q&A, but I just wanted to link it to what's going on and what, again, hopefully more people are becoming aware of how policing affects our communities and our communities of color. So I'll just end with just a few overarching, I guess, conditions or rights that people have or don't have, as the case might be, when they're in detention. So we talked about the history of deportation and detention, how we've increased who gets detained. And finally, if you are detained, which my co-panelists can speak to, I'm sure, more powerfully and eloquently than I can ever do, is what are you facing? What are you looking at? So first of all, the right to bail is not guaranteed like it is in criminal context. So in immigration, it's called bond or custody determination, and not everyone is eligible. The individuals I mentioned who are flying in with a visa, getting to an airport saying, I'm scared to go back, please allow me to seek asylum in your great country, immediately detained, not eligible for bond. There are some avenues for release if ICE grants, but that has just sort of been capricious. So you could have individuals in that situation who are fighting their cases from the inside. Again, those with sort of minor criminal convictions, 1 or 2 marijuana or shopliftings, that's it, you're done. You're considered mandatorily detainable in most contexts. So again, you're fighting your case from the inside. The inside could mean that you're fighting for 5 or 6 months before you get to your trial. And then if you appeal your case, it's even longer. So even those people who are eligible for bond, though, I will say it just varies on the immigration judge you have. We have immigration judges who have denied bond for people with dismissed charges just because they didn't like the initial set of facts alleged in the police report, and we all know how reliable police reports are. So in any case, it's a pretty bleak situation when it comes to actually having the right to get released to finish fighting your case. And this goes to due process, because if you're inside, what do you have? You have access to maybe a law library if you're lucky to have access to that for, who knows, like an hour a week that ICE maintains. So you have to do all your research on your own. You may not have English as your first language. You get an interpreter in court, but you don't have an interpreter or someone giving you translated documents while you're inside trying to put together your asylum case or your cancellation case to try to waive anything you might have in your record. So you're dealing with that situation. And you don't have a right to a lawyer. Again, I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but there's no public defender system in immigration proceedings like there is in criminal proceedings. And so for the most part, you either have to pay for an attorney, you have to represent yourself, or there might be a nonprofit around like American Friends in a lot of states, or a legal aid organization that has some limited capacity to provide lawyers. But again, it's certainly, I don't have the statistics offhand, but at least for your state or your jurisdiction, but the percentage of people who have to go on their own or with, or pay for not great counsel is high, is certainly very high. Finally, there's no right also to actually be heard in person. I'm not sure what the case is up there, but in New Jersey, most of our detained clients and community members have to appear by televideo. So you're operating with pretty bad technology where the judge might not be able to really see you or hear you well. It cuts out. You can't really make an assessment. I mean, you're looking at me on video now, but you can't really make an assessment as to someone's sincerity, credibility, the things that a judge makes these decisions on subconsciously or unconsciously through a video screen. And on top of that, just the procedural difficulties. If you have a document you want to serve, you then have to maybe adjourn your case and wait 4 more weeks while you're detained to try to get that if the judge will accept it. So the situation has been bad. The pandemic made it worse, certainly. So under the pandemic, the law libraries shut down, at least in our facility, so people couldn't even access law libraries. The courts did not shut down. So while everything else was closed, the detained docket was still proceeding. So now you had clients or pro se individuals who are representing themselves appear by televideo, where the judge and the government attorney are on phone. No one can hear anyone. Who knows what kind of record is being recorded for appeals? It's very alarming as an advocate to know that this was happening. And this is, of course, all aside from just the detention conditions of being scared that you're going to get COVID in a tinderbox situation, which all scientists and medical experts have agreed ICE detention centers are. So that's kind of the landscape. I hope I've kept into my time limit. I'm happy to talk further, but I just wanted to situate us where we are, what we faced. It's been bad. It got worse through the pandemic. It definitely got worse through Trump. So there's a lot to fix.
Thank you, Raquiba. That was, I must say, every time I hear this kind of thing, I learn more horrifying details about this whole system. So thank you very much for sharing all that. It's really new information, I think, even for those of us who've been pretty deeply involved for a long time. Maggie, I think you're up next.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, that was excellent and really thorough. So the American Friends Service Committee is 103 years old, and when this Quaker-founded organization came to life, it was Quakers organized into service teams responding to the devastation of World War I and accompanying people whose lives were disrupted and torn apart by the violence of war. So this aspect of accompanying people who are victims of violence, who seek to move to safer lands, to make their lives safe for themselves and their children is baked into our origins as an organization, and it is in these times also an essential part of our work. It connects to our work for economic justice, for healing justice, and for peace and nonviolence around the world. And here in New Hampshire, where we've been for 45 years, we understand the work for immigrant justice as supporting the creation of the human infrastructure that enables us to educate ourselves, advocate for humane policies, protect communities, elevate the voices of affected people, and support emerging leaders. So we're building the infrastructure and supporting others to build that infrastructure. We're trying to construct with others a narrative that has at its center human rights and dignity and nonviolence, as opposed to all of the violent narratives around immigration, the dehumanizing narratives, and to behave together in ways that make real now, right where we are, the world that we want, and point to the world that we can have if we stay in this. So we know this work has to be sustained, it has to be strategic, it has to be effective, and it has to be rooted right here locally. So that's what I get to talk about as part of this collection of voices that you're hearing tonight. And I am so moved to see so many friends in the chat who represent some really important partners and leaders in this work in New Hampshire. So I'll try to name some of those important networks and organizations as I touch on the various pieces of this. But we see our work for immigrant justice in multiple forms. We are trying to prevent harm in some cases where we need to. We are bearing witness to the harm being done. We seek to accompany people in relationships of mutuality and respect for the dignity and choices of people living in a system that denies their dignity and their choices. And we see our work as educating ourselves to demand change. So in the preventing harm category, I want to lift up the New Hampshire Immigrant Visitation Program, which AFSC co-founded with the New Hampshire Conference of the United Church of Christ. The work for this began in 2013, coming out of a week of action with many partners for the Not One More campaign, where we started receiving phone calls from loved ones whose family members were detained at the Strafford County Jail. And a core group of people said, we need access to that facility. We need direct contact with those men and women so that we can provide emotional and spiritual support, try to end the isolation that they're experiencing in a system designed to isolate them, and give people access to information and resources so that they have a chance of fighting their cases. We work very closely with friends at the Unitarian Universalist Action Network of New Hampshire, which has a bail and bond fund, which they have included a focus on immigration bonds in their work, and a very close partnership with, again, with the Immigrant and Refugee Support Group of the New Hampshire Conference of the UCC. Tens of thousands of dollars have been posted for immigration bonds to liberate people from a system that makes it extremely hard for people to win the benefits that they want for themselves. We've engaged in deportation defense campaigns. I think what's gotten the most attention over the past several years was the situation when Indonesian community members here in the Seacoast were told they had 30 days to uproot their lives of 20 years here. Children in our school system, their beloved church members and employees, and led by the Sandra Ponto, Reverend Sandra Ponto of the Indonesian Community Support. She rallied the community to this cause and helped us understand how our voices could draw media attention and then necessary legal support that's led to some wonderful victories in that case. And also in the preventing harm category, I want to lift up the great work being done by the Immigrant Solidarity Network, which is hosted by the Granite State Organizing Project, and the creation of a rental assistance fund. When people realized that in this economic crisis created by COVID-19, immigrant households, many categories of immigrant households simply not eligible for any of the economic assistance that our government was providing. So not wanting people to experience eviction on top of the other crises of their lives. They've given out tens of thousands of dollars in rental assistance. So that's preventing harm. In the bearing witness frame, I want to point first to a long series of interfaith prayer vigils for immigrant justice that have been happening at our federal building, the Norris Cotton Federal Building in Manchester, since the early months of 2017, when we became educated by immigrant community members who said, you know, when we're showing up, you know, ICE, there's 2-some million people around the country who have to, they aren't in detention, but they have to check in with ICE on a regular basis. And when we're walking into those appointments, we know our lives are in the balance, that we could be separated from our family members on that day, in that moment. So, you know, sometimes 50, sometimes 100 people were gathering twice a month at least for interfaith witness there, and for a 7-loop walk around the federal building called a Jericho walk, trying to bring down the walls of separation that keep our community members terrified. And that act of bearing witness has, for a lot of us, really deepened our connection, our sense of connection to immigrant families in that line going into that building, and deepened our commitment to be agents of change in this system. We also, led by Ava Castillo at the New Hampshire Alliance for Immigrants and Refugees, gather regularly or annually for May Day celebrations to hear from immigrant community members about the cause of immigrant justice, the ongoing cause. There's been great organizing in the Upper Valley by the United Valley Interfaith Project to point out and issue a call when there are Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection checkpoints on our New Hampshire highways. People end up in detention from those checkpoints. And now people know to respond, to show up with signs a few exits up the highway, so that people have a chance to get off the road and not end up in detention. And then I want to lift up the great work over the last, I don't know if it's 13 weeks now, of Never Again Action New Hampshire, that's gathered 70 to 90 cars every Sunday, driving around the Strafford County Jail, making powerful connections through the windows with immigrants as well as people serving criminal sentences in that facility, as allies in solidarity say, we see you, we know you're here, we care about you, we demand that ICE release you, especially during this pandemic where no one can be safe in that kind of living. So bearing witness is important for us, important for our connections. We seek to understand accompaniment as a model, especially for those of us who come with various layers of white privilege in a white supremacist society. We seek to understand what is accompaniment, where we are not using power over someone, but seeking to follow the lead and the authoritative voices of people who are affected by this system, learning from them and taking action as they would have us do. So that's prompted us to organize into the sanctuary networks around the state, including the Seacoast Interfaith Sanctuary Coalition that Jim Verschueren mentioned. And what that meant, what a gift for Dover Friends meeting, it meant that we could welcome a beautiful young family into our Quaker meeting house for many weeks last year, as they lived through a terrifying period of being very much at risk for detention and deportation. And now, because this is this ongoing, evolving journey, that's transformed more into a host home network where people are providing places to live for people coming out of detention. And it's evolved even further to be volunteers providing quarantine housing for people coming out of detention during COVID, such as South Church has done with a wonderful young woman from El Salvador, such as Durham Community Church has done, supporting an African man. And as Dover Friends Meeting is now ready to do, supporting a woman who has just been released today from detention and will need some quarantine housing. So that accompaniment work teaches us a lot and opens our heart even further. And then we'll talk about this more in the discussion, but we need to be demanding change as voters, as constituents, as residents of New Hampshire, whether that's calling on our members of Congress to be champions for this cause, and we have our work to do there, calling on our state legislators to lead with pro-immigrant policies, including driver licenses for undocumented people, calling on our state police and local police to not collude with immigration police. So there's an abundance of good network and good community and people eager to learn and to extend themselves into this place. And I think I'll pause there. I have more to say, as you can probably tell, but there are other voices to be heard right now.
Thank you, Maggie. That was perfect timing, and makes me proud to be a New Hampshire resident, actually, to think about what we're working on together. That leads us to our two people who've actually had the experience and are willing to share it with us. And we're going to start with Bienfait Pole. Bienfait, you are muted right now, so you need to unmute, and then we're eager to hear from you.
Okay, that's correct. That's good.
That's
okay.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity you give me this evening to share with you my little experience for what I live in the jail in the Strafford County. My name is Bienfait Pole from Democratic Republic of Congo. I live in here in USA now almost 3 years. I came here in November 2018, fleeing conflicts from discrimination in my country, DRC. When I came, American government was fighting a migratory movement from Honduras and showed least tolerance with all the migrants. I saw like my chance to grant asylum here in America had just been reduced. That's why I decided to go to try in Canada. I went to Vermont. I took Derby line up to American and Canadian border, where I was arrested, trying to ask asylum in Canada. Canadian border policies brought me back to American border, and American policies brought me in jail to Strafford County. It was the beginning of my mara, which consisted of making a call to my wife and my family stay in Africa. They gave me all kind of phone. They have me, but no one could help me to connect with my family. I asked for the phone as well as I could, but the reality was that they haven't line to call Africa. I tried to use some people when they was released, giving them the phone number of my wife and asking them to tell her that I'm okay and I will call her very soon. Unfortunately, once outside, they systematically forgot and no one recalled me. I was very worried, wondering what my wife, who had just spent 18 days without having me on the phone, will think. And one thought I had in my head was that she will think that I was killed, and this made me very, very stressful. I had one contact in Europe who could help me to contact my family. Unfortunately, I couldn't memorize his number, which was in my phone, and I haven't access to my phone. Meanwhile, I tried to ask for it unsuccessful for a long time. The process is very long and impossible. If you want to find your phone, if you're asking for your phone, once in the jail is not possible to have it. I received a lot of promises to get it, but no one was concretized. This situation was not without consequence. My wife, 18 days later, without having it from me, will lose more than 30 pounds. She will receive the first call from my lawyer, who I thank again. When she finds out I was in jail, she will fall down and lose her memory for more than 24 hours. She will take into the hospital by neighbors. During this time, my children, who no longer understood anything, will all start to cry, believing that their mother had just received the news of my death. Fortunately, I have a little girl who is intelligent, who had the reflex to continue the conversation with the lawyer and will know a little more about my situation and will try to calm her brothers afterwards and then put the lawyer in contact with her uncle, who she had just called. The day after, my lawyer told me that he discussed with my family and they are all good. I was very, very relieved. Was that a day I discovered that they give us, the food that they give us was not good for me. But I didn't care about it because I had just won my bet. Another concern maybe could be my clothes that was confiscated by the police at Vermont border. That I'm just waiting until today. That will be all of my story. So my big problem was the phone. The phone. When they arrest someone like that, they must have us chance to call our family. But here in America, especially at Strafford County, you can call everywhere. But to call Africa is like difficult. Is not difficult, but is impossible. That situation made me in a big trouble with my family. And I was about to lose my wife for that. Okay, that's all of my story. I thank you.
Not even sure how to respond to that, Bienfait. It's such a bad thing. Thank you for sharing that. KJ, if you could unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you next.
Thank you, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm KG, and I belong to the Boston Immigration Justice and Accompaniment Network, which in short it is BJAN or Beyond, and greetings from Beyond.
Beyond.
I'm here to share my personal experience in detention. And I come from a country called Uganda, which is in East Africa. And Uganda is a country which has been led by one man. It has been ruled by one man for over 34 years. He became president before I was born. Right now I'm 33 years, and he still wants to be a president because recently he amended the constitution and they had to remove the article which prevents him, that is the age limit, because it's now becoming 80 years. The age limit was 75 and now he wants to stand again. I don't know, maybe until when he dies. So all that has happened, and as a youth, I felt concerned and I felt like, what can I really do to contribute to change? Because he came into power after fighting, killing people. And looking at the situation in my country, we are over 85%, the youth contribute over 85%. So I felt like if we all get sensitized and participate in the elections, we can really provide an impact and change the government. So when I thought about that, I thought about joining the major political party in Uganda, in the opposition because most of them were old people. And I felt like, sorry to say that, but I felt like the youth could need someone of their age kind of to talk to them and persuade them to see that they become active as far as the becoming active politically is concerned. So I had to join other youth members and push this forward, sensitize and encourage our fellow youth to participate in elective politics. Not knowing that that was pushing me to trouble, that after the 2016 general elections, I had to run away from what was going on because arrests were rampant, beatings and tear gas all over. So I had the visa to the US and I traveled to this country in 2017. That was early 2017, trying to distance myself from the chaos that was going on. And I was advised by one of my friends who was in the security organs. So I came and stayed here for some time, and on the advice of other political friends, I had to run back to my country because I had to rejoin with my family. I was missing my wife and my boy. So I had to go back after around 8 months. So when I went back, I had to be active because I couldn't just sit there, see people move on with life and just sit back. I had to continue with my work politically and try to settle in and continue looking after my family, but the situation became worse. Immediately, detention again, and a lot happened. I tried to be brief. Then I was forced to run back for my safety. After all that went, I had to run back. I came at the airport at Logan, and that's where I had to be detained. So when I reached there, I informed the customs and I told them that I was there for protection. And they had to, I reached there at 2 p.m. and I had to be taken to the detention facility at 11 p.m. in the night. It was winter, so cold, and I can't forget that time. It was so terrible for me. So I went there and I was there for close to 1.5 months. That's the time I was there. And some of my observations are here. I found that there is a lot of helping among, a lot of cooperation among the detainees, that they were helping one another. I was so moved by that. You find that they could share information, they could pray together. Whenever we had a chance to interact, people could not just waste time, they could go into prayer and try to motivate one another. That was really so moving because I got to know that most of the people stayed there for a long period of time. I was there for a few days, like 3 days, and I felt like it was too much for me. Interacting with some members there, they told me they had been there for months. Someone told me was there for 7 months. And I was like, oh, this is so terrible. In fact, I felt like I was not fair, complaining after 3 days. Then I found that most of the people had some problems. For instance, some people had a problem with the language, that they could only speak Spanish. And most of the information there was in English. So you could find that someone could hardly help himself because there was literature in the library there. There was a small library that someone could read and try to advocate for him or herself. But because of that, they couldn't really help. Though there were those who could try some English that they could help them to translate, but they couldn't do much because they were quite a number. So because of the language, they couldn't really settle down in the library to read something to help them understand what was going on around them. And because of that, I also realized that some of them could fail even to understand the notices which were brought to them, that the due dates could go by and someone doesn't know when he's having the next court. And there was a case in point that I got to meet one of the detainees from some country, and he had been there for over 12 months. So in one way, kind of got connected to me, and I got a chance to read through his papers, and he had a chance to appeal in the Board of Immigration Appeals, but the date had passed because he didn't know what was in the papers, and he had lost that chance. Knowing it, after a few days, he was detained. I mean, he was deported after 12 months in detention. He had to go back to his former country. I don't know how safe he was, but he was taken. So maybe if he had appealed, maybe, who knows, he could have been helped. So that is one of the big problems that was there. And also lack of representation, that there was a group of people who came from PAIR, and PAIR, that was political, something to do with political asylum immigration representation, that was from Boston. And for them, they could come every other Thursday. So you could find that they can come in when someone's notice has appeared, and someone has to wait for another 14 days to maybe see his case, but they couldn't get a chance. So they end up going to court without any guidance, and somehow, somewhere, they could be affected in their cases. Those people also came in, but very few people could attend to them because most of them were English speaking, and these people really were into Spanish, and they couldn't know how much to express themselves. That was really a big challenge, and how I wish there could be more Spanish speaking people to help these people out, because they really need the help there. Then also what I noticed was the challenge of the lengthy detention, that people were overstaying there, and that lengthy detention really was psychologically torturing, because I was there for 1 month, but I didn't remain the same. 1 month and a half, I felt like I'd been there for a full year, because you feel confined, you feel you are isolated, you are staying with a stranger in the same cell. You stay with someone who tells you had some crimes, and you feel like, am I safe in here? And so there were a lot of issues. So the lengthy detentions, I wish they could look into that, if they could change. I don't know how, but it was too much. People were staying there 8-9 months, and it was so trying to me. I found that it was so bad. And I also found that they didn't give us chance like to go out, and I feel like these were civil cases. I don't know, that's what I got to know, that how I wish they could allow us have some sunshine maybe, but all the time inside, and all that could impact on our immune system. You find that you leave that place, you have not been in the sun for months, and honestly, you can't be the same health-wise. You come out and you find yourself becoming sick, yet you have been a health person, but have no control over that. Then there was that challenge of the hygiene. So someone staying in that place for so long, and some people's hygiene, you find someone like spitting in the sink and all that. Without all that is really trying for people who are there, and it's not really a place someone could live. So I feel like there is really need for people to be helped, maybe to get bonds for those who are able to get bond. And what I realized, that there is that challenge of the fees for the bonds. It is too much money. I got to find that someone was told a bond of over 15,000. And I wonder how someone who is detained is able to get that amount of money. So you find that someone is kind of deprived of a chance to leave confinement. So that was a very big problem. So staying there, I tried to sit down and read the literature because I had a chance of reading the English and understand some stuff. So I was able to sit down and read. I got to know what happens next in my case, and I was able to follow all the steps. God on my side, I was able to be given parole. I was paroled, and I'm now fighting my case from out. Though there have been a number of issues challenging there and there, the government shut down and all that has delayed my case for quite a long time. But I'm happy that I'm out and having the freedom to move around, because there are so many people who couldn't have that chance. So when I came out, I felt like there is a need for me to continue and try to see if we could help people out there. And that's how I came to join the Beyond Network. So I found that they need someone to know really what happens inside there, and people need to be sensitized because no one deserves to live a kind of life in there, unless when someone is a criminal. But someone who is fighting for his life doesn't deserve to be in confinement. So I joined Beyond, and one of my duties there has always been to attend the fundraising activities to see that people who deserve to get a bond, at least they're able to get bailed out and come out and fight their cases from outside. So I've always attended those meetings, and I feel that that could be the easiest way I could contribute for people who are in confinement, and because sharing my story couldn't really change anything that has happened in my life. And so that's how I joined Beyond, and I'm grateful that you gave me this chance to talk to you today. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, KJ. It's actually our privilege to listen to you. So we appreciate you being here, and particularly how you've taken such an active role out of your experience to try to make things better. Really, that's, you can't say enough about how important that is. I'm going to turn it back to Raka and Maggie, I think, to talk about what next steps might be, and then we'll be opening it up to questions, taking the questions that have been put in the chat. So I think we start with you, Maggie. Is that?
Yes, what I'm happy to do in this moment is to share a letter from another man who was in detention for quite a long time, actually over a year. And he had hoped to be with us this evening, but then began to feel unquiet because his case is still open as well. And so he offered instead to write us a letter, which I'd like to just read a few lines of, and maybe we'll find a way to share it with people who are on this call. Dear friends, I'm one of the many unjustly detained by immigration each year in this country. I've been living in this country called America for over 25 years. I have 2 US citizen boys and a wife. I've been working every day since the day I arrived to this country, the home of the free. I've spent my whole teen and adult life working to support my family here. I've been paying taxes like any of you would here. I owned a business, I have a home. I raised my children for a better and educated life that I did not have. I'm just skimming a little bit for the sake of time, but I think we should share this whole thing. I was detained by ICE one day, and these officers had guns such as assault weapons and pistols pointed at me. It was a devastating, life-changing event for my family and for me. I was held with people even facing 20 to life sentences. I would look at myself and think, what am I doing here? What crime have I committed to be in this situation. I was very scared. Over my 1 year in detention, I met thousands of people. Most of them have been deported, leaving their wives and children behind with no financial support, without a husband or a father, only because they were undocumented in this country. So many lives destroyed, children with fear and worry, not knowing what steps to take. What I went through was one of the worst and scariest experiences of my life. So many humiliations and tortures that no innocent person should go through, all because of the immigration system in this country, taking your taxes to support prisons and jails for immigrants. With the technology we have, we could be cost efficient and better for people to be not jailed, but in the community. People should be released. I see Black people being treated poorly and living in this unjust system, and immigrants as well. This country used to be an example for the rest of the world. I still have hope that it could be that, but you have to do better and treat people better. I want to thank everyone for helping and understanding this complicated situation that we have today, facing what innocent people are enduring in this world. Sincerely, your friend.
Thank you, Maggie. I see in the chat from Joanne that we're going to move first to the questions and answers before we do the final wrap up. So I'm going to turn it over, put Robin and Janet back on. And are we starting with Robin or are we starting with Janet?
Me. So I'll start with a question from Laura Montville for Bienfait. She wants to know, what is your next step?
You're muted, Bienfait. Actually, Bienfait and KJ and the four panelists, leave yourselves unmuted, because that way you can just jump right in when the question comes to you.
Okay,
Bienfait, you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself? Or maybe Joanne can?
I can't unmute you.
Okay, he has to do it himself.
Unmute
there you go. Okay, Bienfait, thank you.
Okay. I say my next step will be to bring my family here, because I grant asylum now from what was in March 9th. And now I'm working with my lawyer to see how I can bring my family here. As we said, I have 8 kids and I have my wife who's still be in trouble in Africa, and I have to work hard to see how they can come here too. We did everything. Now we are waiting for the answer from the Department of Immigration, I think, to see if they can come here too. I know it will take too long, but I learned to be patient in whole of my life. Yeah, I'm still waiting for that.
So I just want to make that clear. When I introduced you, I said you were seeking asylum, but now you have asylum. Is that the good news?
Yeah, I get it. I got it.
Ah, okay, great.
Yeah,
well, there's some happy thing happening here. Great.
Yeah, 3 months ago, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Janet.
Yes, so I have a question from Roger Andrews, who wants to know, why can't people just enter our country legally?
Maybe Raka, that would be for you. I think he's referring to when people, that question came up when you were saying that you show up with and then.
I think it's a fair question. The reason, at least I personally, and as an advocate, have a hard time saying, yes, sure, right away is, I would be more comfortable saying that if our system and our decisions and our ability to allow people to enter were equal and fair across the board. What do I mean by that? Well, it's easier to get here. It's easier to come legally if you're from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, our allies, Japan and other places, because we have visa waiver program. We have a visa waiver program where you don't even need a visa to come in. If you apply for a tourist visa, you're most likely going to get it, because there's just either a bias or an inherent saying, yeah, sure, we don't mind you guys coming in, and we know you're going to go back. But if you apply that to the countries where really people are fleeing or trying to flee for reasons that, if not entirely, I'm not blaming the United States for everything, certainly, but that for reasons linked to our support of dictators and leaders in the past, of our fueling arms and drugs, like directly or indirectly, that whole system that led to the violence that we see in certain countries and why people flee. I mean, those individuals in those countries are denied tourist visas. They don't have the luxury of a visa waiver program to just get here easily. So that's why I think it's difficult to just say, yeah, sure, people should come legally. It's if we have a system where everyone has an equal shot of getting here in a humane way, certainly. And to sort of flip the question to, okay, well, what about the people who have already come unlawfully or without papers? There, I think too, I mean, it's sort of after the fact, certainly, but as I think KJ mentioned very eloquently, and Robson in his letter, and Bienfait as well, that there should be a humane system of handling and dealing with situations where people have been here, have been paying taxes, have family here, and are contributing members to society. How do we get them legal status? And up until 2001, we had programs where every few years there'd be a legalization program. So if you've been here a certain amount of years, if you haven't had any serious criminal convictions, and go through all the paperwork and forms and fees, then yeah, you're gonna get a green card. And we haven't had that in a long time. President Obama tried to initiate kind of a temporary program for deferred action, not like just for the kids for DACA, but there was one for parents of US citizens as well, but that never got off the ground, unfortunately. So I think it's a complicated question. And the final quote I'll say to that is, there are people who, yes, are coming unlawfully or without papers or with a status, but I think we have an international human rights obligation. If someone is coming to our borders or ports of entry saying, I fear going back, my government's going to persecute me. I mean, we've signed on to all the treaties on the rights of refugees and the treaties on asylum. At least people should be afforded a humane way to make those applications. Not necessarily everyone's going to be granted, so that's a different and a legal question, but at least to be able to do that without being detained for months at end, without not being able to call your family, without getting a lawyer, without having an interpreter or having access to materials in your language. So it's a good question. I think it's a hard question to answer. So I hope that just at least sheds some light on where I think we need to think about things before we can just say yes.
Okay, thank you. Robin.
Yeah, so Roger also early on asked a philosophical question that we could probably spend 3 weeks on, but I have a shorter way to ask it. He wanted to know, should we let people in based on what they have to contribute to our society? Should that be the standard for how we decide who can become a citizen? So just for a short question, I would like to ask Maggie Fogarty if the Quakers have any position that they're advocating on for who we should let into the country.
Well, when you come from the perspective that there is that of God in every person and that we are all bearers of the divine light, you get a little bit uncomfortable then qualifying that a whole bunch. So we understand migration to be a fundamental, universal human behavior. And we have all sorts of freedom of movement for goods, for products, so that capitalism thrives across the planet. For certain people, it thrives. We need laws that make the movement of people safe and possible. People have been moving for love, for safety, for a new life throughout human history. And what we have now is a contorted, chaotic, profit-driven system that is not serving human dignity and human rights. So I would say the question is, how do we construct humane immigration policies with a path to citizenship, with an opportunity for safe travel for anyone who wants to and needs to travel to make a life for themselves. So thank you.
Eloquent. Janet, next question.
So first of all, I would like to remind people to please jump in with your questions. There are so many wonderful people at 80 of you on the webinar. It would be great to get your questions, because otherwise you'll get abstract ones like I will ask, which is, and I'd like just to follow up on what Maggie was saying, which is, how are we defining asylum? What is asylum, and how is it defined as an international human right?
So I'd rather refer to the lawyer and the professor for those more specific definitions, if that's okay. Raka, do you want to speak to that?
I can just quickly define asylum. So there are certain elements that define an asylee or refugee that come from international law. So in a nutshell, it's someone who has either suffered or fears persecution in their home country at the hands of either their government or some other actor or group that the government is unable or unwilling to control on account of a protected characteristic about themselves. So that could be race, nationality, political opinion, religion, or membership in a particular social group, which is sort of a miscellaneous and emerging category. Be a health condition. It could be sort of a shared past experience. So that's the standard in a nutshell.
Good. Okay, Robin?
So I think what you're referring to is the Convention Against Torture as part of that. Raquiba?
Oh, right. So yes, the Convention Against Torture, that it's a slightly different standard where you don't need to link the harm to the protected characteristics, but we are a party to that treaty as well.
Okay, so my question for you then is that left up to each immigration judge to decide?
So these applications, yes, immigration, well, so let me take a step back. Some people are able to apply without being in deportation proceedings. So there is an agency that takes affirmative applications for asylum in particular. But if you are facing deportation proceedings, then you can apply for asylum, something called withholding of removal, which is kind of like asylum light, and then relief under the Convention Against Torture. So those are decisions that are made by immigration judges. Some of them are discretionary forms of relief where judges have discretion and are given deference to on appeal, and some are mandatory forms of relief where if you meet the requirements, you must get that relief. But at the first instance, the judges are making those decisions and then they can go up on appeal.
Okay, Janet?
Joanne Foster just pumping in. I just want to let Robin and Janet know that the questions, some people are putting questions in the Q&A section. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. There's 3 good questions in there.
Let's see.
And if I'm monitoring time, well, that's about what we have time left for, because we want to leave a little bit of time for what actions we'd like to see people take.
Great. So there is a question from Becky Field. If the occupant of the White House changes in November, how much do you think that would affect detentions? In other words, how much of these detentions are determined by national leadership versus deep-seated attitudes in our country?
Good question.
Yeah, Raka.
I can start. Because we saw detention deportations go up even under the Obama administration, because the roots of detention started at the Clinton administration, I don't think that just a regime change will have a drastic impact on detention numbers. People will, as long as ICE exists, as long as the laws are on the books about who can be detained and who must be detained, as long as there's money in this industry, as long as there's funding for ICE and money for these contracts, as long as for-profit prison companies are allowed to operate, as long as local jurisdictions are making these contracts with ICE, it's going to continue. So I think we can't just rest on that. You know, the work will have to continue regardless of who's in charge.
And I just want to emphasize, follow the money, they say. There are former members of Republican and Democratic administrations as lobbyists for private prison companies, and no one's clean in this business of profit promotion for these private companies. So that's a big driver.
Okay.
Okay, Elizabeth Lowell asks, do we have an ideal amount to always have in the bond fund for detainees in Strafford? So that would either be Jim or Maggie.
It'd be Maggie.
We want $100,000 in the bond funds. You know, there's a sense of it being, you know, that of being blessed, that funds come and then big bonds come and the funds are depleted and then more funds come. And so it keeps working out, and we always need money. Now, I want to make a pitch for both of these. The UU Action New Hampshire Bail and Bond Fund, if you Google that, you'll get to their donation link online. The New Hampshire Conference of the UCC, if you go to their conference webpage and go a page or two in, I'm not going to give the web link, but maybe if we're sending follow-up materials, we can include that. You can designate your gift to the bond fund. The UCC's bond fund also is used for commissary and phone requests for people in detention at Strafford, and that's been a real lifeline for people. I think both of our friends have talked about the isolation and the, you know, we're aware of the ghastly predatory rates of phone calls in jails and prisons. And so that $25 a month that the UCC Immigrant and Refugee Support Group puts on people's phone accounts can make the difference. It's not overstating it to say it can make the difference between life and death if someone can reach a lawyer, reach their family, have them start gathering the kinds of proofs that they might need for their case.
Janet?
So one final question then. It's a series of questions actually from Karen Serhaya, and she asks, what are the current biggest immigration concerns here in New Hampshire? Also, some detainees at the county jail in Dover were released due to COVID vulnerabilities. How are others there doing? And are there regular bond hearings taking place during the pandemic? And I would just like to add as a tail to that, so I think this is the final question that goes to everyone, to Bienfait and to KJ, if people come away from this webinar with 2 stories, what stories would you like them to be able to tell that they learned tonight?
You want to start with that last question for KJ and Bienfait first, maybe?
Yeah. So KJ, let's go to you first. What story would you like people to come away with tonight?
And you're muted, both.
Yeah, he's unmuted, yeah.
I've not really got the context of the question so well. Can you clarify more on that for me?
Janet?
Maybe kind of what message do you want people to leave with tonight from what you've shared, what others have shared? What do you think is what you want people to keep in their minds?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I think people should get to know that people really need their help. Those people in detention, like people need to be bailed out because confinement is not something which is easy. It tortures. Then also to know that people need financial support, especially those who need bonds, because so many people who need bonds, they have families, they have been in America for some time, but they are deprived of a chance to be with their families. So it's all about caring and doing whatever they can within their means. However little it could be, I think the small contributions, if added up, they can always be something of impact. So I think that's what they can take from this.
Thank you, KJ. How about Bienfait? Do you have something you want people particularly to remember from tonight?
Yeah, maybe the same like Jay. I will say people have to know that there is a lot of innocents in jail. When they ask them to contribute maybe for bonds, once they do it, they have to know that they help a lot of people who are innocent and in the jail. Another thing, maybe I want to say to this evening is about the phone, the line to call Africa. Example for Strafford County. They have to know that they have Spanish, they have Mexican, they have all kind of people in jail. There is African inside too. When African is there, if they can do all the best to help African to call to join their family too. I think it's not cost too much to call Africa. It's just an international call. If they can fix it, it will help life of a lot of people. Many people are there and they want to call, they want to speak to their family, but they don't have that
Capability.
Yeah, that possibility. Yeah. Okay, that can be enough for me.
Thank you, Bienfait.
Excuse me, Jim.
Yes.
I just want to react to what Bienfait talked about the phone. It's not just the calling to Africa that is expensive. What I got to know is that this is a business for someone that they're aiming at making profits. Just a call from the cell to someone outside here in America, it is very expensive.
Very, very expensive.
From personal experience, I didn't make a single phone call. I didn't have money. They had kept my money, and the people with me, they couldn't help because it was expensive for them either to call their family. So they had to preserve whatever they had for themselves. So it's all about trying to say that they make communication affordable for people who are detained, because these are not criminals. They are civil people who need to be saved. I think that has to be looked into. Thank you.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, KJ. Janet, there were earlier parts to this question that we didn't talk about.
Yes, I think I remember it.
Okay.
Yeah. So Janet was asking what are some of the urgent immigration related issues in New Hampshire, and I want to flag we have an immigrant-led campaign for driver license access for undocumented immigrants in New Hampshire. Bruno Soares from Nashua has been a fearless leader on an effort. The New Hampshire House passed the bill last year on a party line vote, but it still passed. Elections matter. And then it died. It got turned into a study committee in the Senate, and then it died. So we have to circle back. People have minor encounters with law enforcement for perhaps driving without a license as one example, and it puts their whole life in a tailspin. They end up in detention and possibly deported. So that's something we can fix. We have the urgency of COVID infections and incarceration, not just for immigrants in detention, but for prisoners. We believe that anyone who is not a threat to public safety should be released immediately. Immigrants are in civil detention. We continue to call on ICE to use their discretion to release anyone in their custody during COVID-19. There are a myriad other ways to keep track of people that don't involve incarceration, and a big hat tip to the ACLU for their work in New Hampshire, a class action lawsuit on behalf of everyone in ICE custody at the jail. 20 people have been released so far, either directly related to the lawsuit or because of pressure. And then we need to, maybe I'll fold into my closing remarks to say, we need to push our members of Congress to be champions. They have shown, what do I mean? They have been very effective at the level of constituent services for individual cases and made real differences in people's lives. When it comes to defunding ICE and CBP, when it comes to cutting funds for immigrant detention, they have not yet stepped forward in a sufficient way and demanded those changes on behalf of their New Hampshire constituents who are either undocumented or in mixed status families. So we continue to bring that urgent plea to them.
Okay. Raka, did you have any more you wanted to add to that?
Sort of just steps to be taken. I mean, I think locally everything that Maggie said, as well as I think your community is very engaged, and it's a great thing to be involved in if and how your communities are policed, to have those relationships, because having a progressive-minded DA who's not going to be prosecuting minor marijuana offenses, for example, or to have culturally and racially sensitive trainings for police, however they exist or are funded, is important, because that will impact who you're seeing in ICE custody as well as just who is incarcerated in general. So that engagement is necessary. In terms of lawmakers, everything that Maggie said about making this an issue, making ICE detention an issue, but there's some weird things you can push for too. It's not sort of attention grabbing or headline making, but one interesting thing that I think not a lot of people know is that immigration judges are not technically sort of administrative law judges or what we call Article 3 judges under the Constitution. They are employees of the Attorney General, as are all the members of the Board of Immigration Appeals. It's a very weird setup because it's supposed to be a neutral agency, but you have a very political appointment like the Attorney General's office, essentially dictating what a neutral court should be doing in cases. So we have Sessions, Bar, I can't even remember all the ones we've been through recently. I'm trying to block it out, but they've certified decisions to themselves and are telling judges how they need to decide cases. That should scare everybody. If we have any faith in courts upholding due process and people getting justice, we need independent judges. And I think that is something to push for. Like I said, it's not something very well known or attention getting, but it could make a huge difference, along with working on defunding detention and ICE and changing how our communities are policed, if at all.
We are exactly at 8:30 right now. So Maggie, did you have a final word you wanted to say?
Oh, don't give me that. No, I'll just say thank you. I've got plenty more to say, but this is felt nice and complete. So.
Well, I just want to say this has been a wonderfully educative experience for all of us, at least certainly for me. And I appreciate the panelists and the opportunity to do that. And Joanne, I see you've come back on, so you may be our closing remarks.
Well, again, I just want to thank everyone for sharing, and particularly Bienfait and KJ for teaching and sharing and helping us all to understand the system. So, and thanks to Robin and Janet for monitoring and asking questions. So, and Jim for moderating. So thanks everyone.
All right. Thank you. I think we're saying goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.